Hello, everyone. Welcome to this virtual event with Jami Attenberg, Ada Limón, and their two adorable pups, Lily Bean and Sid. My name is Sarah Hollenbeck. I'm the co-owner of Women and Children First. We're one of the last feminist bookstores in the United States. And we're honored to host this virtual celebration of I Came All This Way to Meet You, Writing Myself Home by Jami Attenberg. We begin our virtual events as we begin our events held in the store with a land acknowledgement. So please join me in acknowledging that the land on which our bookstore stands is the unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami people. There are over 75,000 Indigenous people living in Illinois, and we strive to recognize and honor Native literature and community. Women and Children First is once again closed due to the current surge of COVID cases in Chicago, but we continue to offer curbside pickup, and we ship anywhere in the United States. Our upcoming virtual events are going to be held here on Crowdcast for a while longer. Our next event is with Amani Perry for her new book, South to America. And Amani will be interviewed by Chicago's own Eve Ewing. So get your tickets to that event. A few little notes. If you have a question for the authors, you just put it in that Ask a Question box at the bottom of your screen. Also, there's a very handy Buy the Book button at the bottom of the screen that will take you to womenandchildrenfirst.com, where you can buy this incredible memoir. So also remember that all of our events are recorded. You can watch them anytime here on Crowdcast, so don't worry if you miss tonight, you can watch it later. And I think that's it. So on to the main event. Jami Attenberg is the New York Times bestselling author of 7 books of fiction, including The Middlesteins, All Grown Up, and All This Could Be Yours. She has contributed essays to the New York Times Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, the Sunday Times, and the Guardian, among many others. She lives in New Orleans. Ada Limón is the author of 6 books of poetry, including The Carrying, which won the National Books Critics Award. Limón is also the host of the poetry podcast, The Slowdown. Over the years, I have penciled in my journals so many quotes from Jami Attenberg novels that I have loved. And as I savor my way through this memoir, I came all this way to meet you, I'm adding even more bits of wisdom to those journals. I could listen to Jami Attenberg, frankly, to talk about the career, the actual work of being a writer forever. Her words and her voice are so refreshing and so resonant, and this book is a pleasure and a guide and a friend in a really difficult time. So please join me in welcoming Ada Limón and Jami Attenberg.
That was so sweet. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I love this bookstore so much, and I love seeing Ada. We were talking about how we knew each other before we got on, and we met at a New Year's Eve party. Mm-hmm. I don't remember how long ago it was. It was a while ago.
It was 2000. We were saying goodbye to 2014 and ushering in 2015.
And in Kentucky.
In Louisville, yeah.
And our 2 dogs met and fell in love. Well, my dog fell. I think my dog tried to hump your dog.
Well, and also Lily Bean is, a little shorter than Sid, and was very impressed that Sid was about coffee table height and could get food off of the coffee table. So Lily Bean was very impressed with not only his charm, but also his ability to gain food from the table.
He's devious. He's a devious little boy. I guess I was going to read a little bit, maybe.
Yes, please
Just
read a little bit. We'll have a conversation. You guys, okay. I'm so happy to be here to support this book. It's a fantastic book. I got to read it the very first time in just a PDF version. It's marvelous. So I hope everyone that's here is looking forward to the reading, and then we're just going to have a casual conversation and then a Q&A afterwards. So
yeah, thank you.
Because my darling Lily Bean is drinking water as we speak.
Okay. Thank you to everybody in the chat. It's so nice to see you all here. I'm just going to read from the introduction of the book. It doesn't have it. I guess it's the preface, but I don't really call it the preface. I don't know what to call it. It just exists at the beginning. For a long time, I worked day jobs that were different from the one I have now. For 20 years, I hustled. I ran the cash register at a pharmacy. I counted pills. I sold lottery tickets. I squatted on the ground and counted boxes of enemas during monthly inventory. I shelved books in a college library. I waitressed. I wiped countertops. I took out the trash when my shift was over and married the ketchup bottles too, cleaning off the dried red crust from the tops, which led to a loathing of ketchup, the scent of it, the taste, the texture for the rest of my life. I flirted for tips. I did shots with strangers. I counted out my money at the end of the night. I worked in a pool hall. I worked in a beach bar. I worked the door at warehouse parties. I checked lists. I did drugs in the bathroom. I sent people on their way. I temped. I filed. I answered phones. I typed up letters. And then I faxed them across town. I pointed people in the right direction. Down the hall, one flight up, you just missed him. I worked in 50 different offices all those lives. I took food from the conference room without asking. I replaced women on maternity leave, never men. I lent a hand when they were short-staffed. There was a big mailing, me alone in an empty room stuffing envelopes, fingers stung with paper cups at the end of each day. I worked temp to perm and was supposed to feel grateful. If you play your cards right, kid, I never made it to perm. I worked in an assisted living facility where every day a resident named George came into my office, often introducing himself to me as if we were meeting just for the first time. He carried a hoe with him, which had belonged to his grandfather, who had brought it with him from Norway decades ago, and George would use it to tend the roses in the garden outside the facility. Sometimes he would tell me the same story about the hoe, too. George was sweet, and he was a gentleman. I learned a lot about people and how to be in the world. I worked for a startup where my job was essentially to type really fast all day long. I talked to no one for months. I just typed. The next job, I signed people into conference rooms and assisted with their meetings and listened to them talk about their important jobs while they ignored my existence. I smiled when I didn't feel like it. I tried another job and another job and another job, always searching for a place I could call home. I was creative and I was curious, and there was a propulsiveness to my life. I was completely engaged in forward motion, yet I had no specific direction. A problem I had figuring out the direction. I spell checked. I sent emails. I did math. I copy edited. They would find out I could write and then ask me to write something, and it would only be a paragraph or two, but it made me feel important and special and necessary and like I wasn't totally wasting my life, even if what I was writing was something that wasn't interesting at all. A forgettable arrangement of words, a decoration on the page, the baby's breath of corporate America. I found a way into working on the internet, which was then the new frontier. I wrote, I produced plenty of it garbage. I learned what code was. I learned what keywords were. I learned how to structure a website, information architecture. I liked the idea of that, organizing information. I learned how to write short and snappy things. I worked for advertising agencies, lots of them. It felt like every agency in town. I watched things that I wrote finally exist in the world with the recognition that no one would ever know it came from me. I was detached from the thing I was making. I had no ownership of it. On the side, I started writing personal things on the internet, blog posts, little essays here and there. I began to tune the sound of my voice. I argued with my coworkers about things that seemed important at the time. I asked for raises and got them. I quit. I got fired. A few times I didn't get jobs because people read something I had written on the internet. I had jobs where I was taken less seriously or my opinions dismissed entirely for being a woman. I've been told I am difficult. I am difficult in the sense that I am not easy, but fuck easy. I have been harassed at work, but seriously, who hasn't? I worked for a cable network on websites for critically acclaimed television shows, all of which were created by men. It was the best job I ever had besides the one I have now. I watched how everyone ran around making these shows happen, what a massive amount of work went into their production. Such brilliant people worked on them, but all of the credit was given to the show's creators. Their creativity, their genius, they had come up with the ideas. They had ownership. The rest of us were there to make their vision come to life. We served their ideas. Eventually I thought, what about my ideas? When do I own them? And once I realized that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I could not stay where I was any longer. The solution was to write my way out of the problem. That meant writing early in the morning, late at night, and on weekends. It meant carving out time, claiming it for myself. I thought, I will write this first book and then maybe another after that. This is the thing I want to do. This desire informed the life choices I made, paths I took, and paths I rejected. Everything got easier in a way once I realized this is what I wanted, even as things got much, much harder. I had decided to operate in service of my ideas. There are plenty of reasons why I write. This is just one of them, the sense that I want to own something, own my work, own my creativity, own my name. It is perhaps not the purest reason, not the truest of heart, but for there is some ego attached to it. But it is real. I own these words. I own these ideas. Here's my book. Thanks. Yay.
I love that.
Thank
I
you.
love that opening so much.
Thanks. I think I had you read it once, just that.
You did.
I was like, does it work?
Yeah, and I kept thinking about one of the reasons I love that opening was that it was that recognition of what writing is, and that it is work, and that all of those things that you've done before go into that bucket of writing, that go into that life, right? But I do think there are times where people think, oh yeah, you become an artist and it's not work. That it's all sort of this sort of creative energy that brings us this joy and like leaves us, kind of feeling like we've had this sort of wonderful epiphany. And I think one of the things I really admire about this book, and about you in general, is that you're very clear about the work it takes to make a book, the work it takes to write. And I guess to just like start off like on a first question, just based on that opening, is, what made you decide to, all of your novels that I adore, have read every single one of them and devoured. What made you decide to delve into a memoir after so long, being notoriously the woman who could really write these incredibly complex and rich women characters, that they were the leads, and now here you are making yourself the lead of your own story?
I know. Foolish.
Yeah. So what was the turning point? What was that moment that you were like, this is I'm going to do this?
I guess there were a couple of things that were going on. One is that I had written a lot of books, a lot of fiction in a very short period of time, I think.
Yeah.
To have like 7 books of fiction out in 14 years. And so I knew that I could just keep writing novels.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that last president we had wasn't great. And, to say the least. And I think I had already kind of written my way in that time period. And I don't think I wanted to write in that time period again.
Mm-hmm.
So I just was I just didn't know if I wanted to use that form at that time. And then also I felt like I needed to stretch myself in a new direction, in a new genre. Like I knew how to, it's not like I'd perfected writing a novel. It's not that, but I had done it enough that I was sort of like, needed to take a break from it, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And then also I was about to turn 50. And I think that I was able to look back at my life and reflect on certain things. Like I was ready to reflect on certain things, and I had a pretty good perspective on things. Mm-hmm. Although I've been thinking a little bit about like how like maybe I'm going to read this book 10 years from now and be like, oh, is that what you thought happened? Like, so maybe I'll I'm not going to revise it. There won't be like, the new edition of this book or anything like that. I'll stand behind it because it was true when I wrote it. And that's something I think about a lot. Like even after I'd finished the book, there were some things that are different now, than they were 6 months ago. So, so I sort of accept that it was true when I wrote it. And then I think, so I think I was like ready to tell that story. And then there were some of the chapters that were in the book, and there was one that I had shown you, like, I think fall of 2019, where I was like, this is like, feels really important to me. And yeah. And I knew I couldn't sell it anywhere. Like it didn't fit into any sort of box that I knew of, like in any magazine or newspaper or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And it sort of made me want to write a book around it so that it could exist in the world in a published format. And there are a couple things that in the book that I was like, I would like this to be out there. So, but I was really scared to do it. But, you know, like these things are always like, it always seems like a really terrible idea until it becomes a good idea.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do. And I
Yeah.
think that there's something to be said about the risk. You know, I think that there are things that as you age, and if you've been writing for a long time, that there are moments where you start to think about, where is the risk? Where's the thing that makes me feel a little untethered and a little scared? And then we started, you know, lean into those things. But I was so curious
That's how we grow as writers.
Yeah. I was so curious when you started doing this, because one of the things I really remember, especially when All Grown Up came out, was that there was a sort of pushback from you about like, stop conflating me with the people in the book. Right. And so, and it was also a way of you that you can protect yourself. You know, in poetry, we say the speaker, you know, and of course then I'm always like, it's me, but like,
I'm going to use that.
Yeah. The speaker, you know, and you can say the character, right?
Yeah.
But like, I'm so curious as to, having sort of spent this time that has a little wall around you, that wall of fiction, that people were still trying to conflate you with every single, you know, every article was like, and it was just like, you know, and I remember your frustration at that time. And I was curious for you now with this memoir, what it's like to not have that wall around you. And are there ways that you're protecting yourself now?
I mean, even at the time, I wrote a piece for the New York Times Book Review, an essay about leaving fiction writers alone.
Yeah.
And
it was a great essay.
Which I stand behind.
It's wonderful.
I still stand behind it. I still think it's really true. And I even stand behind like people asking me about stuff that's like not in this book and wanting more information about what, you know, what happened or happened after the book, or, you know, around the edges of the book. And I still don't think I have to tell anyone anything I don't want to. So you know what I mean? Like, I think it's like all about creating boundaries. I recognize that I opened the door for some things by doing this, but on the, you know, I do think like if somebody really wants to go back and like match things, like, I mean, if you have that time, you know,
yeah,
if you want to go and buy my complete collection or whatever, feel free, and buy some for all your friends too. But in terms of like how it makes me feel, I mean, there's just been different stages of it. I've been talking a lot actually with Isaac Fitzgerald, I'm doing a conversation with him later this week, and he has a collection of essays that's coming out. Yeah. And like so he's, you know, he's like a couple months behind me in the like freak out stage. So, I mean, I've gone through like being really just proud of the work before anyone I know has read it, to everyone's going to read it and it's going to be a really terrible thing. But I feel like so far, I mean, knock on wood, that like the reviews for the most part, my understanding is I've only read a couple of them, but my understanding is they're pretty respectful of me. And I'm sure over time, like there'll be some things that might make me feel uncomfortable, but some of this stuff like happened like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I don't know, like if like we should be able to forgive ourselves for the mistakes that we made. And I just think it would be really interesting to be judged for those kinds of things. Like now that I'm like, you know, firmly entrenched in middle age, you know, like if they really want to like be, you know, if people want to like judge me for that, I mean, there's nothing I can do. My understanding also was that from a lot of female memoirist friends is that no matter what happens, if you're a woman and you're talking about sexuality or you're talking about doing drugs or anything like that, like you're going to get in trouble, meaning like people are going to criticize you, people are going to come after you. So I've just spent like a year kind of steeling myself for it. And on top of that, also like nobody could like possibly like judge me more than myself. I'm the one who's going to say like I'm the harshest on myself, and I'm pretty honest, you know, not pretty, I'm really kind of radically honest in this book about like my flaws. And I kind of had to go, I've already gone through that process. So I'm not sure what kind of pile on, like if anyone is like, she did this or that, I'll be like, yeah, I did. It's there. It's on page 26 or whatever, you know, whatever it is. So I've owned up to it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's certainly nothing. I mean, I can't imagine really anything to be scared of. But I also just know that you have been writing essays right along, so it's not like the I hasn't appeared in your writing. I mean, you've been doing that throughout your life. But just I know as a full work that this is the first thing where the I is right out there. So I know it must feel different.
Okay, I would just say one more thing about it, which I would say to anybody who's like interested in writing a memoir or anything that's like even vaguely autobiographical. You need to have the conversation with yourself, which I very much did, about what your intentions are behind it, and be really thoughtful about like how you're going to write about people in your life. And I mean, I was pretty good about showing it to people or letting people know that I'm writing about them, or clearing things with some people that. And changing details so people can't be identified. And like, some characters are sort of like compressed couple of people, or composite characters, I should say. So I was like very thoughtful about it and felt like I would have, if anyone were to sort of question me about it, I would be able to say, well, these are the things that I did, and this was the thinking that I did, and these were my intentions behind it, which really is like what I would apply to a novel too. But this was, like it's just being really thoughtful about your work. And so it's possible, like even like now that I've written 7 books before this 8th book, that I was maybe it was the first time I was, I knew enough to be able to do it. Like I was sort of capable of doing it for the first time.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, I think that this book to me does feel like it has a sense of culmination of a life. But the nice thing is that it's also a life, a full working life. It's not a life that has been lived, right? It's a living book. But I find it really inspiring as a writer as well. Like I feel like there's something that I really love about it not having, and those of you who've already read it, which I know from the chat, many of you have, that there is an arc to it that doesn't feel like the sort of typical false narrative that I always distrust, which is like, oh, well, I started out this way, and look, now I'm like super smart and like everything's okay. And I love that you resisted that. And I love that you were honest and really went for that complex mess that is the writing life. And I want to know if you could speak to that, actually. Did you work on resisting it, or was it just your honesty that brought you into that sort of really fresh take on what it is to write a memoir, maybe without that, what I think of as the sort of false narrative arc?
I mean, I don't have a traditional story. I didn't have that. I always use Cheryl Strayed as the example because she with Wild,
went on a journey.
She went on a journey. I was like, damn, I wish I went on a journey. But of course I went on like 100 journeys, but there wasn't like a particular beginning, middle, and end, except for the story, the story of my life. What I chose was like, because there were all these different versions of me that I could have chosen to focus on. Right. What I ultimately decided to do was to talk about being a writer, right? That's the story of me that seemed like was important for me and what I wanted to communicate, but also it was like the kind of, not the easiest, but it was like the most successful narrative. And so then it's like, well, what are all the things that go into making you a writer? Like I talk about my childhood, I really picked out the things that like made me a writer. Right. And then I sort of did really play with the order of things because I felt like, well, it's what I do, in my fiction too. Like I'm interested in like, inventive structures and playing with time and all that kind of stuff. So it made sense to me to do it the way that I did it. And because that's really how my brain works and it's really how I see the world. But also it was like creating suspense. It wasn't like in a false way, but it was like giving information at the time that it would best serve the story of the book. And you know what I mean? Like I kind of just moved things around. Like, so there was maybe when I started writing the book, like I just dumped everything and there was a timeline. And then as time went on, I sort of like went, well, this is really much more important, or this is like this revelation later on will explain, needs all the other things building up to it, even though this happened 20 years before you, that kind of thing. So I just played around with it and just tried to make it really like a fresh read, there was no story that was available to me that would have fit into that kind of box that you're talking about. The story that was available to me was, this is who I am as a writer. And so my approach to it was like a writerly approach, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of wonderful, because one of the things that I feel like you and I both know this sort of in our lives is that we spend all this time on crafting, right? Like for me, I'm working in the syllable and the line, and you're working in the sentence. You know, I get to the sentence, it just takes me a little longer as a poet. But I do think sometimes we don't get to talk about craft as much as we'd like to. And so I wanted to bring that up because you and I get to talk about it a little bit, just sort of in our side conversations. And one of the things that I love about this book is that there's a sort of pacing and rhythm to each section that I adore. But I also feel like there's such a sense, and you mentioned it before, that present tense and past tense are sort of woven together. And to me, and you're going to have to stop me if I'm wrong, it has a sense of simultaneity. And I feel like it's because as writers, that's how we live. Like in my mind,
all the time,
everything is happening all at once. So I was just wondering if that is true for you.
Yeah. Because I think it's like I'm always having like 10 feelings at once.
Yes.
About everything. It's just the way that I see it. It's very, you know, there's a collage effect to this book that even if you can't tell that it's there, I know that it's there. Mm-hmm. And because it's like every scenario has a different way, has 10 different ways of looking at it. Mm-hmm. You know, in fact, it was like the challenge was like, how do you choose which way to look at it? You know, which part of you is, you know, there's a writer part of me that looks at something, and then there's a woman part of me that looks at something, and then there's like an American part or whatever it is. Everything is always happening at the same time. So these are the conversations I have with my poet friends, for sure. Yeah. I've had this conversation with mortgage partners. So
I'm like, simultaneity.
Yes. So it's like, I feel like it's about it's about like, that's why it's important to like be in touch with all those things, and like in touch with like where you came from, because because you'll be able to like kind of understand why you're making certain choices, because it's, you know, so like there's a lot of stuff about taking risks in the book, right? There's like times where I fall down or injure myself because I've taken risks too,
or leave security for a different kind of risk.
Yeah. And so it's like that kind of like recognizing that pattern of risks in the book, like was really helpful to me to like arrive at the place that I'm at the end of the book too, you know? Yeah.
I have a couple more questions for you, but then I also wanted to make sure that those of you who are here, and you don't have to have read it to ask a question, but if you want to put a question in, you just ask a question. And when I'm going to ask her a few more questions myself.
Because I saw that some of you had read it already.
Yeah. So go ahead and put a question in.
And like
I will get to them.
Yeah. Like last week when I was on tour, nobody had read it yet. So now like it's.
Yeah, there might be some.
Yeah.
But even if you haven't read it yet, you can also, drop a question in. But so before we move to the audience, I wanted to say a couple other things, which is, one of the things that I also, we just talked about it briefly before we were chatting, which was the sense of travel in this book. And I think for those of us who have been, like many of us, unable to travel because of, COVID restrictions and because of the pandemic, or because our work lives have become wildly unbalanced because we're, caretakers or workers of any sort that feel like they're, suddenly doubling down. One of the things that I find that this book gives you this wonderful sense of wanderlust. And there's that travel and location is so key. And these sort of, I don't want to say epiphanies because that's not really it, but like that sort of recognition of the sort of new self that is revealed to the writer as she goes, through this journey. And I just wanted to ask you about what was it that made you sort of bring those locations in, and are locations important to you as a writer? And, moving forward, do you see maybe even doing more of that kind of travel? I don't want to say travel writing. That seems to be almost diminutive, but that sort of sense that I think you have a wonderful sense of place when you write. And it's such a relief to read it, especially right now when we can't travel.
Thank you, Ada.
Yeah.
By the way, Ada has this poetry collection coming out that you should buy. We should drop that buy link in the. It's so amazing. If you guys are fans of Ada's work, you're fans of Ada's work. If you don't, it's just like, it's such a wonderful. We like swapped our books. Like we'd both been read. These are both of our pandemic books. So anyway, it's so good. It's so good. Get ready. Okay. You're my poet laureate, Ada. So you asked about travel. So much of what I've done in the last decade is travel, as you have done a lot of it too. And so because I was like, one of the opportunities that I had when my fourth book came out is that I started to sell internationally. You can see Sid in the back. Can you see him?
There he is.
Right, there he is. He's like, what's going on out here? I've got to investigate. So like that was like who I was like for so long, and like that was in fact I had like a little bit of an identity crisis when the pandemic happened, because I was like, who am I if I'm like not going on this German book tour, and the answer is I'm this person who's writing this book right now and like figuring things out. I think it's like knowing yourself as in a foreign country when you're an American is kind of an interesting thing, like looking back, especially because I don't speak any other languages. So I could just sort of like passable, restaurant, Italian, things like that. So it sort of forces you to be in your head and to be self-reliant. So that's part of it too. Like you really are like kind of actively noticing things in a different way than you would if you were like in your, own home, or even or your hometown, or if you were, for me, if I was in New York, I don't notice things the same way as I do in Italy. So, and then I think it's like the experience of talking about your work in another country too, because so much of it was me traveling as a writer, speaking here and there. Like it's sort of, I've thought about being a writer there in a different way than I thought about being a writer here, and representing myself in a different way. And then I just love travel. I love to eat in other places. I love to see beautiful things. I like to see crumbly things. I like to see, I like to meet new people. I just love it all. And I think, I'll be able to come back to it. I'm sure I'm supposed to go on the same exact German book tour that was canceled at the beginning of the pandemic has just surfaced again. So I will hopefully be able to go and do it.
Fingers crossed.
What is time? We don't even know.
We don't even know. It's all happening all at once.
It's all happening all the time. It's the same exact tour. Yeah. So I think that was part of it was of why I wrote about it. But then also it's just really interesting, like it's not everybody has the opportunities that I've had. So I wanted to like, honor it, like honor the luck and the fortune and the, also hard work that went into it. But like, what a lucky person I've been, like what a life that I've been able to lead. So it did make me feel wistful for it too. Yeah. Thinking about Aperol spritzes in Naples in particular, and the eating, like for some reason, like just eating like really, like why were the nuts so good in Naples?
Right. Because everything is good
at the bar. But they were so good. So I don't know. It just felt really important to me to talk about it, to think about it. I don't have like, I'm not knocking my life. It's really like a great life, but I don't have some certain things that other people have, because I'm such a solo person, and I really am solo in a lot of this book, in much of this book too. So, but those are the things that I get to have.
Well, that's one of the things that I loved about the travel in general and the locations and how central they were to the unfolding of the narrative, was that they did add this incredible texture to the book, and it felt like they were as important as the people that you come into encounter with. So it's like, I love that part.
I like to write about place.
More questions, and then we'll go into the audience questions. But the last one I want to ask you you just mentioned that you were solo in this life, so much of this book. But of course you're not. You have this incredible way of building community, an incredible way of really boosting the writing community, encouraging other writers around you. And I think those of us who know you personally and even on social media know that you are someone that really reaches out and encourages other people and supports other people and serves as a booster for people who are writing prose or poetry. I'll add that in there. But I also want to ask you, in building community and in your writing, how important is Sid? I mean, he is your partner in all these things. Solo is not.
Yeah, we were talking about. I know that was very insulting to my dog that he went, because we were talking before we came on about how our dogs are our muses. Because they sit with us. And
I actually want to know about that. I actually want to know.
You know, it was funny because there was a guy who just came down here, Jesse, who came down from New York to watch Sid, and he's writing a book. And so we had one night where there was a crossover. So he stayed in one room and I stayed in the other room. And Sid came and slept at the foot of the bed with me. In the morning, I had this little chat with Sid, and I said, now you need to be a good writing companion to him because he has a lot of work to do on his book. Yeah. So you need to sit with him and be nice to him and just be there with him. And then I got back from my book tour and I was like, how was he? He's like, he sat with me all the time. He's like, every room I went to, he would just come and sit and be near me. I was like, he is a writer's dog. The pug breed, I think, is really good for writers. I have a feeling. He's just very, he's like very present. Mm-hmm. He's just around, I think she probably does the same for you. Like, it's just like very nice to have him here, but I don't write about him really very much. I don't have I'd like take a lot of pictures of him, but I don't have very much to say. I mean, I did one interview about him for New York Magazine, and I felt like that was like probably enough. Like let me say this, everybody's dog is special. Everybody's dog is special and important. Yeah. And the most important dog. So we all get to like love our dogs, and I think they're all great.
I will say, I think that one of the things that comes out, not just in the book, but it's there as well. But and I know for me, I do think it brings that animals in general can bring us out of ourselves a little bit, and I think that we spend so much time in ourselves and talking about our own writing and just thinking about our own thoughts and what we call thoughts about our feelings, feelings about our thoughts, however that goes. And I do think that animals bring us out of ourselves for a second and we go, oh, and that's why I think I don't want to spoil the ending, but I think honestly, the last, couple sentences are just delightful for that reason.
Yeah, it was, cause he's there, right? Yeah. Like there's like a little thing in the book where it's like, I take all these risks, and somewhere at the beginning of the book, I talk about how like, I'm not interested in comfort. I'm not interested in safety, right? Like, I'm just really interested in being a writer. And then at the end of the book, I sort of talk about how now I have those things. Like, I have stability and I have comfort, and it was never really the goal, but it's really nice to have it, have that. And, but even still, you just don't want to get too comfortable. It makes me feel nervous to be too comfortable. I want to always be on my toes a little bit.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
Well, we have a couple of, thank you for that. Thank you for answering all my questions.
Thank you for doing this. I'm so happy to see you.
Oh my gosh, it's my pleasure. I love your work. We have a couple questions from the audience. And the first one I love, and I think it has something to do with the beautiful rhythm that you read the first preface, as you said, you don't want to say preface, to the book, was asking if you had a music background because of the way you read and your sense of rhythm.
No, I have a poetry background.
Yeah.
That was like what I wanted to be when I started college. And then I had a fiction professor who talked me out of it because I was my fiction 101 professor. But I do like cut. When I wrote poetry, I used to like really like cut, like enjoyed cutting lines. I don't know what that means, but that's what I enjoyed doing. Like I enjoyed or breaking lines and like moving things around.
Yeah.
And so,
that's the rhythm. Yeah, that's where the rhythm is.
Yeah. And so I always enjoyed doing that and counting things, and like that all kind of made sense to me. And so when I write a sentence, like I usually write it and it's like usually kind of loopier and longer. And I always have to kind of, cut things down a little bit, like, because I would just have sentences that would go on for pages if I really wanted to. That's not necessarily poetry, but there's sort of a flow to it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I just like to like let things go. And then like the kind of mathy part of me wants to like put things in, make it so that it's more readable. Not that poetry isn't readable, but like if you're reading prose, you're expecting prose. Yeah. So that was kind of a long, so no, not a music, although I love music, but more like a poetry background. And I said every once in a while I'll write a poem and then I'll be like, stop it. Because like, it's not like, it's like I have to like, oh, my battery's dying. How's this even possible? I charged it before. We're going to move into another room. It's not, sorry, this is so embarrassing. It's my event. But it's not, it's just like, I realized that like poets do so much work and it's like, why do I think I'm so special that I can just write a poem? Because I know how hard you guys work. You know what I mean? Although I do feel like I could write a movie at any second.
Yeah, I mean, I never feel like I can write anything. So then suddenly a poem happens and I think, oh, yeah. there that is. There's that.
I just respect poets so much, and also comedians. Like I really respect comedians. Everyone's like, oh, you're so funny, you could be a comedian. And I was like, do you know how much work comedians do?
Oh, like so hard.
I really respect, right? But every time I talk to somebody who writes a screenplay or a TV show, they go, "That's easy, you can do it." So that's why I think I can do it. That was a long answer.
Please do it. Okay, here's another question. I love that answer. How's your battery doing?
It's fine now. I've moved into
that's not from the audience. That's from me.
Now you're getting a tour of my house. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, this is the next question here. So much of our lives are shaped by our childhood. Even if we move away, we carry it with us. How do you think your upbringing impacted you as a writer?
Oh, I mean, that's a good question. If you haven't read the book yet, there's a lot that is in there about that. I think that like two of the main things were one thing is that my parents owned a small business. And so it kind of taught, and my dad was a traveling salesman. So it kind of taught me how, like the idea of like needing to go out on the road and represent yourself on the road, and like the idea of selling things, because I think when we do here, some parts of our job is actually like being a salesperson, right? I think you understand that, Ada, because you do so much you're so public facing about your work as I am. And then also I think like there's something about like us being a small business, like understanding that we are our own small business, right? So like our brain and our ideas and all that kind of stuff is like helpful to like making a living. So it's not really about being an art. I'm not really talking about being an artist necessarily. I'm talking about being a working artist, a professional artist. So that's part of it. Like that's been helpful to me in terms of like keeping my head in the game and like somehow managing not just to like make a little bit of a living off of it, but like a little, like thrive a little bit from it. Right. Yeah. Not that I'm a rich person, but just like now I own a little house, like that kind of thing. Like, and so then the other thing is like my mom's going to be really happy that I'm talking about this, but like my mom really encouraged me to read and be a writer and like was very supportive of that. And she's like, now this is her third event watching me say nice things about her.
Mom.
But it is true, like, because I have people in my life, I have writer friends in my life where I feel like it's harder for them because they didn't have that person telling them. I mean, you can do it without somebody telling you as a child that you're supposed to be a writer. You don't need that. But it was something that I always kind of knew from a very young age, that it was like I was good at it and that I shouldn't be afraid to try it because it's because I could, right? Yeah. So that's important. And then everything, I don't know, growing up in the Midwest means something different than growing up on the East Coast versus growing up in California. Like everything plays into everything else forever and ever. And if you can channel it and be responsible to it, then it can be beneficial to you in the end. This lighting is amazing now. Jeez,
I think that's really well put. And I love that you spoke to I don't want to say the hustle, but like actually being able to put your work out there. Because I think it's it's another part of the job, and it's another skill set. And I think it can be highly underrated. And
I know that. Yeah.
I think it's something you can learn, but I think it takes work, and I think it's another kind of work, and it's also another self, right? Because we have to be vulnerable when we're writing, and then we have to be armored when we're presenting, and those are two different selves. And I don't think we talk about that enough. So I love that you brought that up and gave props to your family for that.
Yeah. I think also, I just want to say, like, I didn't get an MFA, right? But I get invited to speak sometimes in graduate programs, and it's been a while since I got asked to speak at a very prominent graduate program, and they were like, talk about whatever you want. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to talk about how to like create a platform for yourself, and like how to use the internet to like promote yourself, and like all the things that sort of go into like making a career as a writer. And I was told that everybody hated that talk. That was probably like, I think it was like maybe like 8 years ago or something like that. Mm-hmm. And everyone was like, not happy. They wanted me to talk about craft. And I was like,
you were ahead of your time.
I was like, all right.
I think you were just ahead of your time. Yeah. I would say you could do it now.
Yeah. So I feel like I wish that like programs would sort of, I mean, I remember like having, I think I wrote about it in the book, I can't remember, but like having this like very adrift feeling right when I graduated. I did get an undergraduate degree in creative writing. And I remember just sitting there going, well, what do I do now? Like, what am I doing now? And like watching everybody else like go to like career day in their business suits. And I was like, well, none of those jobs are for me. Like what is it? Yeah.
And I think there is something to be said that how to make a living and a life as a writer is a big topic, and it's many layered. And I think it doesn't just take sitting down at the computer, right? It's all the other things that happen even after you've made something. So I love that and respect that you brought that into the conversation, because I think it's important. Here's another question for you from the audience. It says, it's amazing to see you two together. I'd love to hear you both talk about the role of friendship in your writerly lives and the way you found your way to other writers.
Aw, that's really nice. Yeah. I mean, we can't all be at random New Year's Eve dinners together, of course. Although it's nice that we met that way and not like necessarily at a conference. Like maybe if we'd both been at the same like AWP, maybe we never would have met, because you would have been off talking to the poets, and I would be off talking to the fiction writers or something like that. But I like the poets.
Met in the dog park though.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But I like meeting the poets. I appreciate that. Here's the thing about a poet is like, you will meet them and they will immediately ask you what your sign is. Guaranteed that happens. When I went down to the Key West Festival, I was sitting across on the aisle from Jericho, and we were talking, and within like 10 minutes we're masked, we're on an airplane, we just met, and he's like, what's your sign? And I was like, Scorpio. He's like, oh, Scorpios are sneaky. They're sneaky. And I was like, I love poets. I miss seeing poets. I mean, I have poet friends here, but it's not, out in the world. So I don't know. I think it's like, for me, I really actively pursued friendships with writers when I was starting to write. Like I would go to readings. I always tell people to go to readings, but of course we can't do that now. It's not the same thing. But I think
people are at this reading right now,
and maybe they could meet. When I was in New York, if you guys know, some of you might know what 1,000 Words of Summer is, which is just this thing that I do once a year. Ada has contributed to it, and it's just like a bunch of people writing 1,000 words a day for 2 weeks, and there's 15,000 people that are at least participated, and it's really wonderful.
And it's so encouraging. People finish projects, people finish whole books.
I would really recommend doing it, but also there were 3 women that came to my reading in New York, and they were like in the signing line, and they all each came up separately because you could only do one at a time because of the mask. And they all had met in the Slack for 1,000 Words of Summer and had formed a writing group. They all lived in New York, formed a writing group, which they Zoomed while everyone was still supposed to be just Zooming. And then now they meet in person, and they have formed a cohort based out of that. And they wanted it, and they reached out for it, and they did it. It was an unconventional way perhaps to meet, but it's what we have right now. And I think if you want to meet those people, you weren't asking me necessarily for advice, but I think it's about reaching out and asking for it. But I did, like, I started a reading series after I sold my first book. I started a reading series in New York. It was just for people who had debut books coming out, and I met people in that way. I've thrown different reading series over the years. But the friendship part of it is like so sustaining. So sustaining. It's like, what would we do? I saw in the acknowledgements of your book, there was somebody that you had a list of people that you said you send poems to and they would read it that day.
Yeah.
Did I make that up?
Yeah, that's true.
Incredible, right?
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, like, I mean, that day, you know.
I mean, to be fair, everybody wants to read your poems, so they're probably really excited to get it. But it's a little like for me, like if I were to send like an entire novel every day, people would be like, "Could I have a minute, please?" But
I love what you're talking about. That sort of sense of it's not just friendship; it's also building community, like you were talking about, which is something I mentioned earlier about you and your personality and what I think you offer to the literary community at large. And I think that that's a good way of modeling for other people that it's not like one of the things that I find really important is to support one another, to show up for one another, right? To just encourage, to like send a note that's not always asking for something, you know, that's just saying like, hey, like I just read this. It was awesome. Have a great day or whatever it is. And I feel like the more you can do that and the more you can just actually, you know, support each other, I feel like that really can be so refreshing and wonderful because, you know, I think that people think you know, you reach the number of 6 books or 7 books or 8 books. And suddenly it's like people think, oh, they probably don't need to hear anything or they probably don't need, you know, and then to someone offering some encouragement or offering a little note of gratitude is so wonderful. And I think that the friends that stick around to do that, you know, that show up to things and have busy lives. And I know that that it does feel like, oh, this person's been coming to a poetry reading for 20 years. Like that's something that's saying something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about like being curious. I mean, I'm just genuinely curious about what people are doing. Yeah. I'm genuinely like, if I have writers that I like really love their work, I'm like, well, I want to like as soon as I can, like you, I was like, please, whenever you're ready, I would like to see it. And I want to know what's going on in the world. I want to know what people are like, because that's how you grow as a writer, because the stuff that's coming out now that like people like debut authors, like I love debuts. I write about it in the book how much I love debuts because I'm like, this is the future. Like, you know, they're gonna all be burying me someday and throwing, you know, dirt on my grave. So like, I hope I liked your book if you're doing it. You know what I mean? Like, it's really important. It's just about having a curiosity about the world too, I think. But I do, of course, I want to support people, and I do appreciate it when people support me. When I had like my very first time ever being in the New Yorker, or on the New Yorker website, I should say. And I was at this festival in Key West, and I met a writer, and the first thing he said was that he'd read it and that there was like, he specifically liked one thing about it, like, and I was like floating on air. Yeah. Like really, really floating about it. And yeah, I don't know. It's what you want to put in. What do you want to put into the world? What do you want to put out there? Like, what kind of person do you want to be?
Yeah.
No pressure.
I totally agree. No, I think it's really important because I think that the writing life can be a lonely life, but it doesn't have to be a lonely life. I think the work can in some ways be like, okay, I have to do this alone, but it doesn't mean that all your people and loved ones and ancestors and friends and, you know, aren't with you as you're working on those things.
That's right.
And so I feel like, you know, if you feel like really super alone when you're writing, I'm not quite sure if the work will have that sort of sense of reaching out that it might need if you can allow those other people in. And
but sometimes you want to touch that loneliness a little bit, like tap into it. Like you just want to like, it's just like knowing how far you can go before you feel too sad. You know, like just like
a poet. So you're speaking my language.
Like if you feel good, and how good can you feel feeling bad?
Yeah, when you're like, oh, this is hurting. I better keep going.
Right. And then the dog comes in and you pet the dog.
And then you remember. You kind of go, oh, so sorry. Who's just writing about death? Well, I know that we only have about 5 minutes left, but I wanted to ask you, is there any question that you haven't been asked yet on this sort of this mini tour you've been on, and this first week, celebrating the first week of this beautiful, wonderful memoir? Is there anything that like you want to say about it, or that we haven't touched on? I know you'll have many other conversations to come, but in our conversation tonight.
Oh, golly. You know what? No one really talks to me about the ghosts very much, which is such a like big part of this book.
Yeah.
And I feel like in the reviews, the two that I've read out of it, like they weren't really focused on that.
I love the ghosts. Yeah.
I mean, I'm all about the ghosts, you know, and so
yeah, lots of bones and ghosts, and yeah.
I think people are embarrassed to admit their feelings about ghosts.
Oh, I agree.
I think that people are like, even though we have like everything is like haunted, like there's so many haunted movies and ghosty books, and you know it's out there in the world, but like people don't. I think it makes people feel like someone's going to judge them or be like is it like a little too woo woo to talk about ghosts or anything like that? But so I think people kind of steered clear from that. I mean, it's fine. I don't need to talk about it. I'm happy to talk about writing and process and like community. Like all those things are really great. And you've done a wonderful job, Ada. I appreciate it. But it has been interesting to me. And even then when I start saying it out loud, when I talk about it, like, I'm like, did I just ruin everything?
No,
I talking about ghosts.
I think ghosts are really important. And I write about ghosts. Same. And to me, they exist in the same sort of realm as dreams in terms of, and they're just as important. Like for me, the dream reality is just as important as the waking reality. But as I'm saying that out loud, that makes me sound maybe a little, do you know what I mean? So yeah. But like, I think there is that sort of question of, do I talk about this? Because in revealing my interest in it, am I then sort of being vulnerable to my own idiosyncrasies that connect to my spirituality?
Yeah, but I think like, I don't know, like, let's get weird, people. Come on. Like, and you know that shit's out there.
Yeah.
It's out there. And it's like, and you don't, and like so much of like, this book, like when I was writing it and thinking about it, I was like, oh, it's so much about like recognizing like who was here before us, and like, and especially living in New Orleans, like you're keenly aware like that this land is like built on many, many bones, you know, in a way, and histories, and histories and things like that, and so and layers and time is always happening and all that kind of stuff. So now I'm definitely sounding a little loopy, but it is true. Like
but I love it.
Yes. But like that's like to me like was like a big moment for me to be able to walk out in the world and just be like, I'm not the only one here, and I need to like always be, you know, I don't think you have to spend your entire life like thinking about it and I'm being like, I'm honoring who's here and everything like that, but I try to like be conscious of it now more than I was probably in the past when I was out traveling, you know, in the world. Like, and I think like part of that of like going to a catacomb or going to an ossuary or like doing a little bit of research and thinking about where you are, thinking about the history of where you are, is like helpful and important probably, because someday you're going to be like down there too.
I think recognizing ghosts and talking about ghosts and ancestors is also reckoning with mortality. And I don't think we do that enough, at least within the United States. And so I feel like that part that you may feel resistance towards is some of that resistance towards the fact that we don't deal with grief and death and our mortality as a culture. So I love that part of your book because it also was like, it made the voice and the importance of writing and the importance of recording and marking this time and valuing this time as so essential to not just the making of the memoir, but the making of you, the writer.
Yeah. It's about, I think Alex Chi, I remember he was talking about how he wanted to claim his personal history when he wrote his book. And I was like, that makes perfect sense to me. Like, just like definitely like marking it. I think the other thing about like having like mortality issues is like I had it like for like the age 40 to 42, it was like kind of rough for me, where all of a sudden I realized for the first time I could like die. Like up until that moment, it just never occurred to me before. And I think one of the reasons why we like have a hard time with dealing with it in this culture is because we don't know what happens after. And we're such a matter of fact culture in a lot of ways, where we like we just need to know about the, you know, the what's going to happen here, the risk, like we're a risk assessor kind of culture, you know? And so, but I think when you're a writer, whatever kind of writer you are, like we traffic in the not knowing. Like we're comfortable in the not knowing.
Well, because we're all about questions.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, wow. I think we got there.
I'm glad I asked that question, because we got ghosty.
Yes.
I love that. I love that. Well, I hope everyone goes out and purchases this, or purchase it here.
Purchase it here. Yes. And Ada's book, you guys, please buy Ada's book.
Coming in May.
Awesome.
May.
Yes, so good.
Yes, I dropped the chat to pre-order Ada's book in the chat, so that's there. And we have Brittany's book right now. I loved that conversation so much, and I love that detour at the end talking about mortality. That was the best. And our evasion of mortality. So thank you all for joining us, this amazing crowd here that are all clapping in their own homes, I'm sure, right now. I just loved their honesty and vulnerability and everything about this book. So buy the book, pre-order Ada's book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, wait. Thanks. It's on my desk. I was reading it today.
Thank you so much, everyone. For an awesome night, and I hope to see you in Chicago someday.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Bye.